You know what they say, bigger isn't always better. But you know what? Sometimes it is. And when you're holding a Smith & Wesson 4506-1, it definitely is. So, if you're at all into guns, I don't think you can watch the movie Training Day and not want one of these things. In that movie, Denzel Washington's character, Alonzo Harris, he carries two of these things in a dual-sided shoulder holster. And there's just, I don't know, there's nothing more badass than that. And to me, this is just kind of like the quintessential tough guy gun. I mean, it's big, it's manly, it's macho, it's heavy, it's almost over the top, it's long, it just kind of exudes toxic masculinity, and I think it really fits that kind of macho persona that a character like Alonzo from Training Day had. And this gun also featured prominently in the series The Shield, which I know is very popular. The character Vic Mackey, played by Michael Chiklis, he carries this gun, and at the same time it was extensively used by law enforcement. The LAPD in particular, they used this gun. It was definitely one of their issue guns by the late 90s, I think into the early 2000s. And I think this gun is kind of perfect for the kind of corrupt outlaw cop characters like Alonzo Harris in Training Day and Vic Mackey in The Shield, because certainly it is a duty gun in real life. That's, could have been what cops in the LAPD would have carried, but it still has this kind of play-by-my-own-rules, larger-than-life swagger to it that I think fits those kind of characters. So, and I realize that's kind of deep for a gun review, but while we're on the subject of the kind of literary interpretations of firearms, this gun does have a fascinating story unto itself that goes back, like so many other fascinating firearm stories, goes back to the early 1980s. So, going into the big 80s, Smith & Wesson did not offer a big 45. People have been asking for one up until that point. They had double-action, single-action pistols dating back to the 1950s in the Model 39, which was the single-stack, and then the Model 59, which was the double-stack version of that. And at that time, one of their competitive shooters, a guy by the name of Tom Campbell, who was also a designer, I guess, for Smith & Wesson, he was winning IPSC competitions using 1911s, presumably made by Colt. So you can imagine that's kind of a conflict of interest from a brand standpoint, and Smith & Wesson wanted something that was from their own company that could compete and win these IPSC matches. So they let this guy, Tom Campbell, kind of design his own gun. And he started with the Model 39 architecture that Smith & Wesson already had and kind of scaled it up into this big, beautiful single-stack 45, which he called the Super Gun. So, I mean, it's kind of a cool name. Maybe Smith & Wesson should kind of recycle that moniker. So he started using this gun he had designed, like loosely based on a scaled-up version of the Model 39, and he again was doing very well in these IPSC competitions. And by 1985, Smith & Wesson had kind of standardized that design. They added a double-action, single-action trigger, which was kind of par for the course from that era, and they made it all stainless steel. And stainless steel was kind of a newer innovation at that time, and they gave it these sexy polished flats, and that became the Smith & Wesson 645. That was their first 45 ACP pistol. It's also worth noting that at that same time, Miami Vice was one of the preeminent crime dramas of the 80s, and it was moving into its third season. And for the first two seasons, the kind of lead detective in that series, Sonny Crocket, played by Don Johnson. He had been using the Bren-Ten pistol, which is kind of infamous. But by that time, the company that made that gun, Dornaus Dixon, they were kind of an obscure company. They had gone belly up. They weren't making the gun anymore, and the guns they had made were kind of iffy in terms of their quality and reliability. So the producers of that show, one of whom was Michael Mann, and he's just kind of known, if you've watched some of his other films, known for really authentic gun handling in his movies. Collateral with Jamie Foxx and Tom Cruise is one you should check out if you haven't seen it. Heat with Al Pacino and Robert De Niro, that was a great one from the 90s. Anyway, so they wanted to give him kind of a state-of-the-art gun at the time, and the Smith & Wesson 645, which had just been released at that time, kind of filled that slot. And it definitely looked the part in, like, 1980s cocaine cowboys era Miami, and like, Ferrari Testarossas and the shiny stainless slide. Like, it was great. It looked great. So he carried that thing for 2 seasons, seasons 3 and 4, and then by the late 80s, like 88, 89, Smith & Wesson was updating their entire lineup of semi-automatic pistols. So they went to what's called the 3rd generation, and they gave the 645, which had like old school, 2-sided grip panels like you see on most metal frame guns. They went to this single wraparound one-piece grip. They went to a removable dovetailed front sight. The 645 had a built-in ramped front sight. And they went to this more satin matte stainless finish instead of the polished flats that they had on the 645. So the 645 became the 4506. But that is not where the story of the 4506-1 begins. To do that, we're going to have to go back in time a few years, once again, to 1986. And if you are into guns, you probably know what I'm going to say. There was an infamous shootout, which fittingly happened in Miami, and basically this group of criminals outgunned the FBI agents that were trying to apprehend them, and a couple FBI agents were killed, and really it led the FBI to kind of examine their doctrine with small arms, and the culmination of that was that they were looking to create this kind of new wonder caliber that could solve all of their tactical shortcomings just by being a better round all around. They worked with this company in Sweden called Norma Precision. I think Jeff Cooper, who was kind of like the godfather of modern handgun shit back in the 80s, he consulted with them too. And they came up with this cartridge, this new cartridge, the 10mm auto, which I am sure you've heard about if you're at all into guns. The interesting thing about 10mm is that the 10mm cartridge is roughly the same length, almost exactly the same length, as a 45 ACP. So I've got here's the 10mm, here's the 45, and they're pretty much the same length, as you can see. So what that means is that you can chamber a 10mm cartridge in a 45 ACP sized gun. And certainly that's why we have the Colt Delta Elite, which is basically just a plain Jane 1911 that they decided to load 10mm. They may use a heavier recoil spring in the Colt Delta Elite, I'm not sure. But Smith & Wesson obviously had their 4506/645 platform, and that, is a big, tough gun. Still even a little bigger than a 1911, a little bigger and beefier. So that makes a good candidate for a 10mm platform. But I think, unlike Colt, Smith & Wesson did it right, because the 10mm does generate higher pressures than 45. So what they did, they took the 4506, they beefed it up. There was some lightning cuts in the frame of the 645 and the 4506. They eliminated that so that the frame was a little thicker and stronger. They beefed up the slide. They made the slide like a millimeter or two thicker all around. There were probably some other changes too, but those are, the big substantive changes that they made to the 4506 platform to handle 10mm. So the gun they ended up with was called the 1006, and fitting with the Smith & Wesson third generation naming conventions, 4 digits for the 3rd generation, which 4 digits, 3rd generation, whatever. That's just the way Smith & Wesson did it. But so they had this big old beast of a handgun in 10mm. Yet, obviously, 45 ACP wasn't going away. So instead of going back to the kind of thinner design of the original 4506 and 645, they basically decided to take the 1006 and rechamber it in 45. And that became the 4506-1. Long story short, if you get the 4506-1, it's basically a 1006. It has the beefier build of the 10 millimeter guns that Smith & Wesson made. And it's worth noting that, you know, most people will point out that the main difference between the 4506-1 and the no dash is the trigger guard. The 4506-1 generally has the rounded trigger guard, whereas the 4506 and the 645 have like the more squared off trigger guards with like the little hook on the end. And I will say I think there were some very early 4506-1s that did continue to have that hook trigger guard, but by and large the dash ones are going to have the more rounded trigger guard, and that's the easiest way to tell them apart. So for me, I found that the beefier build of the 4506-1 actually is a benefit to shootability, because I had a 645 for years, and it was a good gun. It was solid. It was reliable. I never had an issue with it. It was comfortable to shoot. It was big. It handled recoil well, as you can expect. But I always shot the damn thing left, and like not egregiously. It wasn't terrible, but like it was just enough to piss you off. Like you just be off your point of aim just enough to be like, damn, like why can't I move it over an inch or two? And so it was always kind of frustrating. But you know, I liked the gun. I hung on to it for years. And then I finally got the opportunity to grab one of these, and I took this to the range with my 645. And, you know, I was halfway expecting this to shoot kind of like the 645. And, yeah, I kind of wanted this more for Denzel Washington reasons than anything. So I was just like, yeah, I'd probably shoot like a 645. I mean, at the end of the day, really, it is just a beefed up 645. How much different can it really shoot? But I was wrong.
I'm on my way too.
This gun it was different on the range. It just, right out of the gate, I mean, it shot right to point of aim, very precise, very accurate. It handled the recoil of 45 even better than the 645. And, you know, after that experience, I was like, well, maybe I'll put the 645 for sale. So I did, and literally within an hour after I listed the thing, someone bought it for my asking price. So I don't know, maybe it's meant to be, but I'm thrilled to have this, and it's as I said, it certainly has that kind of iconic macho presence to it, and that's why I wanted it. But beyond that, it's really an excellent 45 caliber gun. I mean, I can't think of a gun that just handles 45 so well. I mean, it just really tames the recoil. And like, I don't mind 45 recoil, but you do feel it in guns that are smaller and lighter than this. Like even a P220. You know, I've had a P220 for a long time. Here's my P220. Like, you know, you feel the recoil a lot more in this, and it's notably smaller, and it's aluminum alloy framed, and it's you know, the slide's lighter. The slide's a stamping on this one. And the newer P220s have a machine slide. I'll also note that when I was at the local range, they have this ammo from Ammo Inc. I don't know if you've heard of it. I think the guy who runs that company is that guy from Monster Garage, Jesse James, I think is his name. But yeah, he started his own ammo company, and they had a lot of that stuff at the range I went to, so I bought some. And man, the recoil is heavy on that shit. And I actually had a few failures to feed with my P220 using that ammo, and I've never had any kind of failure to feed with this P220. That was kind of surprising. But you know, the 645, I'm sorry, the 4506-1 handled that stuff like it was nothing. No issues, and it handled the heavy recoil a lot better than this, obviously, because I had some failures to feed. And I think what was happening is I was getting what's called inertial feeds with this, and that I've experienced that on certain other 45s. Basically, the slide recoils so hard. The recoil is so hard that the top round basically bounces out of the magazine, and then when the slide comes forward to feed, it's all jacked up and hits at the wrong angle, and you get a jam. But I will say that I'm using the old school magazines for the P220, and in the later iterations of the mags for the P220s, when they went to like the 8-round versions, they included a little dimple that helps kind of stabilize the rounds, the top round in the magazine. It helps hold it in place to kind of prevent the inertial feeds. And I don't think I would have experienced that had I had the newer magazine design. So, if you run P220s or P220 derivatives, maybe that's one thing to keep in mind. Especially if you have an older one like this, maybe update your mags. I probably will get some of the newer mags for this one, and just one thing to keep in mind. And, given my experience with this versus the P220, that's one thing that I think is kind of legendary with the 4506-1 and all of the big metal frame Smith & Wesson 45s is they just have kind of legendary reliability, and they're just known to kind of feed anything. If you read on forums, you'll kind of see that they have this halo of reliability about them. And one of the kind of legends that you'll find online is that these guns can actually feed empty cases. So I have found that to be mostly true, and I'll show you here in a second. But one thing about loading one of these magazines with empty cases, the empty cases don't fit in the magazines. It's weird. Like once you get more spring pressure on these empty cases, they start to spring out. So if I put more than about 6 in a magazine, they just kind of spring out of the gun. But they will feed. I have found most of the time they will feed, and it was the same for my 645. I was able to do that with my 645 as well. So empty gun, and here is a magazine full of empty cases. So there's one, there's two, another one, another one, another one. So there's six empty cases. So you saw it here. You saw it, maybe not first, but you saw it here, that this gun can feed empty cases. And as I said, the shootability of this gun is just excellent. And I think that has to do with the heavier slide that they put on the Dash 1 versus the no dash 4506 and the 645. I think it probably just keeps the gun a little more stable, a little more aligned as you're shooting it. For me, that translated to better accuracy on the range. As I said, I had a 645 for years. This gun shoots better for me than the 645. If you're looking for a big, easy shooting 45 that's just nice to shoot and reliable, this is a great option, especially if you want something in double action, single action. So, this is an empty mag. You have to have a mag in the Smith & Wesson 3rd gens because they have magazine disconnects. A lot of people hate that. I don't really care. I can't remember the last time I've ever shot a gun or wanted to shoot a gun without a magazine, so works for me. Anyway, the trigger on this is standard fare if you're familiar with 3rd gens. The single action is good. It's nothing extraordinary. It's got a firm wall, and you pull past it, and it's got a nice snap to it. Not quite as crisp as what I find on a Beretta 92. That's kind of my gold standard for just a really good stock trigger, single action trigger on a DASA pistol. Now, the double action, as I've said, if you've seen my 5906 video, the double action on the Smith & Wesson 3rd Gens, I think, is really, really good. I think it's better, generally speaking, than what you're going to find on a Beretta or a Sig from the same time period. And very smooth, basically no stacking. And the big thing with the Smith & Wesson 3rd Gen double action triggers is that it lays the hammer down so gently. You don't get the gun doesn't jerk as much as some other guns, and the sights stay more aligned, I think, with the Smith & Wessons. And I think that's because there's a little less over travel built into the lock work of the Smith & Wesson guns. This gun definitely reflects that, and my Smith & Wesson 5906 is also just has a fantastic double action trigger. Actually, I think this one might be even a little better than what's on the 4506, because I think this was maybe used in law enforcement a little more, so it's seen a few more rounds, so it's just a little bit more broken in. But yeah, if that's one clear strength of the Smith & Wesson 3rd Gens all around, is they have really good double action triggers, and they have good single action triggers. As far as negatives for this gun, for what it is, I think it's hard to find a lot of clear negatives. Certainly, it's big. It might not be your go-to option for concealed carry, but I will say it is even with the thickened slide versus the original, the OG 645. It does carry reasonably well on the waistband. It's not uncomfortable. It's heavy, but you can work with the weight of a gun. The grip is long. It's probably not going to be like a shorts and t-shirt kind of gun. This will kind of poke out of a t-shirt. I run my guns pretty low at about 1230, appendix inside the waistband, and I can get away with a gun with a long grip like this as long as the t-shirt's not, too form-fitting. It probably wouldn't be my first choice, but it can be done. And for a winter carry gun, yeah, sure, this is going to be fine. Jeans and a decent belt, and you're going to not have any problems with this, especially, if you're wearing like a flannel or a sweatshirt or something like that. You're not going to have any problem hiding it. And then obviously shoulder holster. I mean, that's where this gun comes into its own. Carrying one of these big old stainless cannons in a shoulder holster is just cool. And for me, a shoulder holster, especially when I'm sitting down or driving or whatever, that's the most comfortable way to carry. It's not the quickest way to draw, but for just having a gun on you if you need it, I think a shoulder holster, as long as you have a cover garment, is a nice option. Another thing that is just kind of, I don't know if it's a negative, but it's interesting. The grip on this is super thin. Like, look at that. And you can get different grips for this gun, but the stock grips, which are called Delrin, these one-piece wraparound grips, you can get an arched one with an arched backstrap, one with a straight backstrap like this. They're both very thin, and at first it's kind of like, it feels almost kind of spindly in your hand. Like, you've got this giant, long, heavy slide and this kind of stick-thin grip, and it feels strange. Not necessarily bad, but just strange. But then you shoot it, and it feels great. Sometimes the grips that are just too thin, it's hard to, control the gun, because there's not enough, thickness to get your support hand in there. But this gun doesn't suffer from that. Certainly the thin grip and the straight backstrap, again, empty magazine, it gives you a good trigger reach. And sometimes, if you have small hands, I'm sure you've experienced this, I do, on 45s, because the length of the grip, the depth of the grip is more because the cartridge is longer. Sometimes trigger reach can be more of an issue on 45s, but with these thin grips, it really kind of mitigates that, and I get a good, lots of finger on that trigger. It's nice. Even in double action, I can get plenty of trigger on that thing, which is surprising for a gun this big in 45. So yeah, it's kind of has a different feel. And the gun almost feels kind of gangly just because it's so long and it's got this long grip. But trust me, it works. Smith & Wesson knew what they were doing, and they designed this gun right. And I will say you can also get the rubber Hogue grips. Actually, that's what came on this gun, and they feel good. But again, I think you give up the shortness of the trigger reach when you have those thicker rubber grips. They're thicker this way too, not just in terms of the side, so it pushes your hand away from the trigger just a bit. I prefer these. It's worth noting that that's what Denzel had in training day. You know, certainly this big heavy slide helps stabilize the gun, I think, as it's cycling, and that's one reason I think it shoots so straight and it's easy to keep on target. But, you know, you have a lot of mass reciprocating back and forth. You have to give the gun time to recover from that wallop of this big heavy slide coming back at you. And you maybe not are going to shoot this, you aren't going to shoot this quite as quick as some other guns, especially like modern 9mm with a really low bore axis and lighter slides and everything. It's just, that's not what it's for. I mean, it's built to just put big old freaking holes in things as accurately with as little drama as possible, and that it delivers sublimely. With those caveats going into it, I think it really delivers on just a really nice, excellent platform for launching 45 ACP comfortably and accurately and reliably. So if you're watching this video and you don't already have one of these things, chances are you probably got your eye out, you'd like to grab one. Like so many other guns recently, the prices have gone way up. If you look on Gunbroker, even the well-used ones that are there are like going for 900 and some bucks. For ones that are a little more pristine and come with the box and all that stuff, they're going for over 1,000. So I don't know if they're moving super fast at those prices, but that's a lot to ask for one of these. I think, you know, especially when you add in shipping and transfer fee, and a lot of those companies that sell on Gunbroker want a credit card fee too. So that's a lot. And you know, like I said in some of my other videos, keep an eye out locally. Look for local listings. You know, just look on Google for other online sellers that aren't Gunbroker, that aren't selling on Gunbroker. You might find a better price. Case in point, I bought this one from guns.com, and shout out to guns.com. It was a good experience, and this is the first purchase I've made through them, and they had free shipping, and they had what I thought was a reasonable price for this gun compared to Gunbroker prices. And I got this for $7.99. It's in really good shape. They described it as excellent in the listing. I would say it definitely lives up to excellent. It's a really nice gun. Certainly not cheap, but you know, you're not going to get one of these guns cheap in this day and age. It's interesting, you know, like I said, I would Google search for these things, and I would find listings from guns.com that had expired like 5 hours ago. And, like, I had just missed it. And finally, I was on their site, like, actively looking, and I found one that was for sale. I hadn't sold yet, and I bought it within a few minutes because I knew I wasn't going to get another chance at a semi-reasonable price. Yeah, and guns.com also, they did the FFL, you know, that was kind of automatic. They, like, had the gun shop I use for my transfers like in their system, so that was easy. So yeah, check guns.com. You can find some good deals on there. You know, some of their prices are high, some of them are more reasonable. I thought this was a more than fair price for this. So in conclusion, I started off kind of saying that this gun is an icon it's kind of a movie star. You know, it's kind of the anti-hero of on-screen kind of cop guns of the late 90s, early 2000s. But it's a lot more than that. Certainly it lives up to that kind of swagger that I want, which is the reason I wanted it, but it's really a great 45. And, you know, if you're not looking to go 1911, you want something that's double action and maybe even a little softer shooting than a 1911. And, you know, this has this nice big external extractor. A lot of times 1911s with the old school internal extractors, they need to be hand-tuned, and they aren't hand-tuned a lot of the times from the factory. So, you know, this is going to be set up to run right out of the gate. As you saw, it feeds so well. It feeds empty casings. I'm not sure a 1911 can do that. So you're going to get a superbly reliable, low recoiling, very shootable, big old 45. And if that's what you're looking for, this thing delivers. Yeah, if you can get your hands on one for a reasonable price, totally recommend it. I don't think you'll be disappointed. So I want to thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate you guys tuning into these videos. Check out the written review. The link is in the description. I just, you know, go into a bit more detail on some of the things we talked about. And if you like beats, like the one I used in the intro, link to my SoundCloud is also in the description. So thanks again, and until next time, this is Hipster Tactical, and I'm Matt.